One of the most common questions I get from you guys is how much home can I afford if I make this much money? So in this video, I'm going to do a complete breakdown on how much home that you more than likely will be able to afford if you make under 100,000. And for the simplicity of this, I'm going to do right at 99,000 per year. Now, if you do not make this amount, you can simply substitute the exact amount that I'm using with whatever amount that you have, so that will make more sense and be a little bit more personal to your unique situation. So first, let's talk about what lenders will consider when they're determining your ability to qualify. First, it's going to be your auto loans, personal loans, student loans, credit cards, mortgages if you own a home already, alimony, child support, and also child care. Now, the difference between child support and child care are two very distinct things. One is going to be child support is something that you're paying based off of a divorce decree or a court order, whereas child care is going to be for maybe schooling or if your kids are in daycare. They're two separate things. So if the children are in the household, more than likely you're not going to also have child support. If you don't have child support at all, you can completely ignore that aspect. But these are going to be the main things that the lender are going to look at. Some common mistakes that I see veterans make when trying to decipher how much they can qualify for is they add in certain things that the lender actually does not consider. This could be for things like whatever you're currently paying for rent if you are living in a rental. This does not count because if you are going to use your VA loan to purchase a property, wherever you are renting is not going to exist after you buy that property because you're going to move into that new home. So your rent does not actually count. The other things lenders are going to not consider is going to be auto insurance, gas, any streaming service like Netflix or Hulu, cell phone bill, utilities for maybe your electricity or your water bill, and then any groceries that you have. These are all things that do not actually count when it comes to what you actually could qualify for. Now let's jump over to the income aspect of things. Another common mistake I see veterans making when trying to figure out what they would qualify for is they use the net income that they're going to receive. And this is actually incorrect. You're supposed to be using the gross income. As long as you're receiving some form of W-2 wage earner, they're going to use your gross income. If you are a commission earner where you are receiving like a 1099 or you are self-employed or you have any ownership of a particular company, this is where the lender is going to have to use the tax returns to determine your ability to qualify. So that amount could actually drastically be different depending upon what you're making on the gross aspect of things versus what you're going to be making in regards to the net income. Now, when qualifying for a VA loan, the lender is going to use that gross monthly income we talked about versus your monthly debts. They're not going to use the balances or the amount owed. They're going to use the monthly debts to be subtracted or counted against your gross monthly income. So if you're watching this video or prior to watching this video, you were thinking that your debt balances were going to be heavily scrutinized, that's not exactly going to be true. They're focused more on what's the monthly obligation compared to the monthly income. So now I want to create a little bit of a scenario here. We are going to use 99,000 as the total annual income. So we now need to break that down to a monthly level so we can compare it to monthly debts. So if you actually divide 99,000 from 12 months, your total monthly income is going to be 8,250. Now remember, if you're following along and trying to do your situation, just substitute the monthly income that I'm using here for this example. So 8,250 is going to be for a $99,000 annual income. The next they're going to do is look at the monthly debts that you are going to have. And it's going to be based off of those things that we talked about a little bit earlier. So let's, in this scenario, say that you have an auto loan, actually two auto loans, because I want to do a household of 4 because it's going to be a little bit more common to everyone else. So we're going to say 2 auto loans for both adults in the household and maybe there are 2 children. So auto loan number 1, I did a number of $700 per month. The reason for that is because I did a little bit of a basic Google search, which I'll show up right here. And I found that the average auto loan in the United States as of 2024 was at $734. I did find another statistic with Experian, I think it was, and it said that the average auto loan as of February 2024 was $644. So I kind of wanted to split the difference between those two numbers, and I just went with a round number of $700. Now, because we have 2 individuals in the household, I wanted to add an additional auto loan. I didn't want to do the exact same amount, so I went down to a lower amount of $600. So that's a $1,300 overall expense for auto loans. Now, again, this is probably more or less than what you may be having, so you can again substitute your situation here. The next thing we're going to add in is as if that you had some form of credit card payment. So I'll throw up that screenshot again that we used for auto loans, and you'll see that they also had on this particular survey how much someone possibly was going to have for credit card payments. So I threw up $200 for this scenario. And then when it comes to childcare costs, I wanted to put $800 just for an example, because this does count on VA loans. This is actually one of the times where childcare is factored in on VA loans, but not factored in on other loan types. Now, there's a reason why VA does this, and I'll get to it a little bit later in the video. So if we add up all of those monthly liabilities for card number 1, card number 2, credit cards, childcare, the total monthly liabilities for this household is $2,300. So now what we need to do is we need to take the total liabilities and we need to subtract it from the total monthly income. So if we take $2,300 and we subtract it from the total monthly income of $8,250, this leaves us with $5,950 left over. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is going to be debt to income. This is a very common term that I hear veterans and homebuyers mention. Even if they're first-time homebuyers, they're constantly wrapped up in what's the debt to income ratio. So here's what you need to understand. When it comes to debt to income ratio, VA does not use debt to income ratio to make the final decision, but VA does have a debt to income ratio in their handbook, which is actually a part of your ability to qualify. You see, in the VA handbook, the debt to income ratio actually says that it's 41%. But here's the thing about that 41% debt to income ratio. This means that if a veteran has a 41% debt to income ratio or greater, meaning anything over 41%, the VA is going to require you to meet the residual income amount along with an additional buffer. So residual income is what the VA uses to make their final decision to qualify any veteran going through the home buying process. And the thing about residual income is it's based off of how much money you have coming in versus how much money you have going out, based off of all of your monthly liabilities and expenses. And this is also why VA counts childcare, because of the residual income amount. Childcare does not affect debt to income. It only affects residual income amount. So what we need to do in order to find out the residual income you need to have left over is going to depend off of first where you're located geographically. The VA has 4 regions listed in the VA handbook: Northeast, South, West, and Midwest. Depending on what region you're in, that will determine what the VA says you have to have left over. So now that you know what region you're in, this is the particular chart to determine what the VA requires you to have left over after all of your bills are paid. I live in the southern region, so for this example, I am going to use the southern region's requirement for a household size of 4. So as you can see on there, the VA says you must have $1,003 left over after all of your bills are paid. But this is if you are under the 41% debt to income ratio requirement. As you can see, I have a little snippet that I pulled from the VA handbook directly, and it says that if a veteran exceeds the 41% debt to income ratio that the VA has in place, then in the situation of using residual income to qualify, you now have to have an additional 20% left over. So what does that mean? If your residual income amount is $1,003, as it says for a household size of 4 in the southern region, we need to add an additional 20%. So we need to do $1,003 plus 20% to come up with what the VA says we now need to have left over. So in this situation, I would now need to have $1,203.60. So we would just round it up to the nearest dollar, which would be $1,204 left over after all of our bills are paid. So what we now need to do is we need to take that $1,204 and subtract it from the amount that we had left over after we subtracted our debt. So if you remember, we subtracted $8,250 and we took $2,300 from that total monthly income. It came out to $5,950 after our monthly debts. So now we can subtract our residual income amount, and it's $1,204, which now leaves us with $4,746 left over. So now I want to go through some additional information that is going to be extremely important for you to understand with regards to VA handbook. So this is going to require me to bring up a particular property. I am looking for a property in the New Braunfels area. If you don't know about New Braunfels is right in between San Antonio and Austin, Texas. I am actually in the San Antonio area, but I am looking to actually make the transition to New Braunfels. So it's actually something that's caught my attention personally. So for this property, the total purchase price, $399,900. And then when it comes to interest rate, I like to just personally go off of national average data, just because because of simplicity, this does not mean this is what the rate would be for somebody today. This is just national average, very general data. So 6.58 is kind of where things are floating at right now. So we're going to use that for the sake of this example. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come down to the additional information, and we need to add in our HOA payment. So this calculator that we're using uses the annual amount. So I do have to do a little bit of math by combining these totals here. Now, what I want to do is I want to come back up over here and I want to focus on these things. VA eligibility. So active veteran, reservist, National Guard, surviving spouse. This obviously would depend on your eligibility. But when it comes to this aspect, used a VA loan before or service-connected disability, the reason this is an important question is because the VA has a funding fee associated with it. This is also what funds the program and something I talk about a lot in that video about VA entitlement or VA eligibility. So if you're using the VA loan for the first time at zero down, the funding fee is 2.15% of your loan amount, and the funding fee gets rolled into the loan. If you are using the VA loan for a subsequent time, which is anything more than the first time, then your funding fee is 3.3%. So I want to not use the VA loan before. And then down here, it asks if you're collecting VA disability of a 10% rating or more. The reason this is also important is because if you are collecting VA disability of a 10% rating or more, the VA says that you are going to be funding fee exempt for the rest of your life, no matter how many times you have or have not used the VA loan, and no matter how many times you maybe plan to use the VA loan, you would be funding fee exempt. So even if you checked yes, but then now you're collecting VA disability, then there would be no funding fee whatsoever. So I want to actually leave that as this situation and just assume that someone's not collecting VA disability, so that way the funding fee gets rolled into this particular scenario. We already added in these details here, which means that we're going to calculate our total, and this will show you the total amount that you would have for your actual situation. So you have your principal and interest payment, which would be $2,603.51. You have your property taxes of $371. You have your homeowner's insurance of $293, your HOA of $44, which brings the total monthly payment to $3,311.51. So if you remember earlier when we were doing all of our subtractions for residual income, we had gotten from our $8,250 for total monthly income. We subtracted $2,300 of monthly debt from that. Then we also subtracted the residual income amount that the VA says you need to have left over, which brought us down to $4,746 remaining. Now what we get to do is we're just about done. We're at our second to last step. Now we get to do is subtract the $4,746, and we're going to subtract our total out-of-pocket monthly payment, which is $3,311.51. This says we now have left over $1,434.49. The last thing that we need to consider, and is one of the most overlooked things, is going to be the fact that the VA has one other thing that we need to factor, and this is going to be what's called maintenance. And when it comes to maintenance, what the VA wants you to do is they want in the VA residual income total to factor in a potential maintenance amount for if there is anything that goes wrong with the property. It is not an actual bill that you're going to pay. It's not a monthly expense. It's actually not a part of your monthly payment. It is nothing you're physically required or expected to pay. It's just an additional buffer that the VA wants to see factored into your overall situation as additional money left over to make sure that if something goes wrong with the property, you potentially would have that money available for that particular thing. And how they come up with this total is going to heavily depend on the property that you're looking at. So if you are purchasing a property, they are going to require you to look at what is the living square footage of the property, not the total square footage, just the living square footage. So if we come back over here, we have two things that you'll see in square footage. You'll see the square footage for your lot, 8,276 square feet. That is not what's required. They want to use the square footage for the living space, 2,301 square feet. So what the VA is going to require you to do is multiply 2,301 times 0.14. If you do that, the calculation for this particular property for maintenance is $322.14 per month. That's an additional amount the VA expects you to have left over. Again, as I mentioned, I preface, it's not a bill, it's not a payment, it's nothing like that. It's just simply an additional buffer, kind of like what we talked about with the residual income actually, and how we had to add that additional 20%. It's similar to that. And so now what we need to do is take that $1,434.49 and subtract that $322.14 that we had got from the square footage amount from that. And now that brings us to $1,112.35 as money left over. In this particular situation, situation. All right, so that's my breakdown of how much you could afford if you made $100,000. Some things that I want to preface before we wrap this up is some important details that you guys are probably going to bring up, which is going to be, you may have heard that you have the ability to gross up when it comes to qualifying for a VA loan, which is true. Grossing up is something that can be done to increase your non-taxable income like VA disability or BAH or even Social Security to help your debt to income ratio. But in the VA handbook, it also clearly states that grossing up cannot count towards residual income. So this is where it often gets very confusing for veterans when they're trying to purchase a house, because they think automatically if they gross up their income, it's going to help them qualify for more. And that's not entirely true. In the VA handbook, it is very specific about how grossing up works. So that is why I did not include grossing up in this particular scenario, because again, the residual income is actually what makes the final decision. So I don't want to add any more confusion to this situation. The next thing that I want to talk about is this is also why it is very situational, because your monthly debt plays a very, very big part. And this is why I wanted to preface in this video that it's heavily situational. Your monthly income is not going to determine your ability to qualify a loan. It's also going to be the monthly debts and going to be the property you're considering. So if you're trying to figure out exactly what your ability to qualify looks like, this is why it's important to work with a VA knowledgeable lender. So if you've watched this far in this video, I would hope that you would want to work with me and my team. All we do is VA loans, and all we talk about here on this channel is the VA home loan benefit. So if you're not already subscribed, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button down below, and also like this video if you got value from it, because this allows it to get shared to more veterans just like you who need to know this particular information. Now, the last thing I want to leave you with, it's the most important thing, and it's Jesus loves you and he paid the ultimate price for your life. So if you turn to him, trust in him, and believe in him, he has a beautiful plan and purpose for you. I'll see you in the next one.